Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the workshop Bringing Out the I in You. I welcome Steve, sir, Alpna ma'am, Vinaya ma'am, and all of the dear participants who took part in this eminent workshop adapting to American work culture. This workshop will be focusing on the influence of American work culture and businesses on other countries outside the United States of America, including their business practices. Culture is the underlying values that influence our communication and behavior. One of the most important aspects of culture is individualism. Something about people working for the US company in the US or from their company, a workshop with activities designed to prepare foreign-born residents of the United States for full participation in citizenship. It aims not only at the achievement of the naturalization, but also an understanding of adaptation of principle of American life. Today, we have Stephen David Bloomberg from USA, an English communication skill coaching consult of an intercultural awareness for international in the States. He will be telling us more about the workshop and how we can bring out the I in you by adapting through the American work culture. Welcome, sir. The stage is now to you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to Bringing Out the I in You. So as she said, my name is Steve, and I'm going to talk to you about a cultural characteristic called individualism. I'm going to talk about and describe the individualist culture in the US, how that affects communication, and what is considered to be good and successful communication in the US, particularly in the context of work and business. So what is the focus of US individualist culture? Well, the focus is what I do more than what we do. In other parts of the world, people focus on the we or the group. In the US, we tend to focus more on the I. The group is important, but the tendency is to think more about what happens to I, not so much we. So this has implications for how we communicate at business or work. So English-speaking countries, by the way, are the most individualistic in the world. So it's not just the US. However, the US is the most individualistic country of all the English-speaking countries in the world. It's interesting to note that English is the only language that capitalizes the word I. And as interculturalist researcher Gerrit Hofstede notes, other languages capitalize you. So the US is, as I said, known to be the most individualistic country in the world, with Australia following close behind. So we can ask this, do you view yourself as part of a working group, or do you view yourself as a working individual? In other words, do you identify more with I, or do you identify with we more? How do you see yourself in relationship to others? This affects how we communicate. It affects our communication behavior, and communicating from this viewpoint, from this standpoint, if someone is coming to live here and work, will have some degree determine how successful they can be. So here's some observations about individualist mindsets and ways of thinking. So this is really foundational so that you can understand what motivates Americans or even Canadians to speak and talk the way they do. And because this is cultural, it's not conscious. People are unaware, for the most part, in the United States, that they speak in this way. Some Americans may be aware that they are an individualist culture, but it's not something that is really top of mind. People are unaware of how they speak and why they speak that way, and they might even think that everybody else speaks the same way, and that's not true, obviously. So in an individualist culture like the US, people view competition as being between or among individuals. So more than being between or among groups. So remember that this is a generality. It's a strong tendency. This does not mean that teams and groups are not valued in the US. They are. Context is important. So the thing about people who are more individualistic, they value tasks first. So what has to get done is the first thing they're thinking about, and the relationship comes second. In less individualistic societies, relationships are more important, and they can interrupt tasks and interrupt things on the calendar. Not so necessarily in the United States. So now people are more, as I said, people are more focused on or their I in doing things more than they're focused on people in their environment. So the emphasis is on schedules, appointments, and getting things done on time. Even a phone call requires an appointment sometimes. I can recall someone that I was a client here from China, and she's a marketing professional, and she told me that she was calling her clients here in the States, and she was working for the same company at the time, located in China, then she moved here. She would call her American clients here, and she got the feeling that her call wasn't received very well, that she was interrupting them. And it was, she didn't understand what was really happening. And she said she called her clients in China all the time, and her calls were received very well, whatever it is, whatever business she had to talk to them about. So I told her here that people don't like to be interrupted. They want to know that if you're going to call with something important to say, they want to know that it's going to be arranged in advance. And so she thought that this was something personal. They didn't like her. They didn't want to talk to her. But I told her that what she really has to do is send an email, say you've got something really important to talk about, and ask when you can make a phone call, when they can take a call. The other thing to think about, if you're talking about people who are task focused, like individuals, if you really have to call without advance notice, then you should say something like, did I catch you at a bad time? Can you talk now? Do you have a couple minutes? Or let them know explicitly. This is very important. I really must talk to you about this. But to just call without any advance notice is not a good idea, because as I said, individuals are focused on their task, not the people in their surroundings or the environment. So, so here's the thing, with individualist personalities, more things also must be communicated explicitly. You must specify. If not, then people might wonder if they might think to themselves, well, I'm not a mind reader. So where you might think some things can go unspoken, such as, this is a really important call, I must talk to you right now. You might think that someone understands that. Not necessarily so. If you're talking to an American, you've got to say, this is really important. Can I take a few minutes of your time right now? Otherwise, make an appointment before you call, send an email. So anyway, let's talk just a little bit about collectivist personalities. So collectivist personalities have much more of a tendency to say less because they think that certain things are understood without saying them. This is so because the group may more often have shared information, or context can tell people what is so without having to state it openly. This is not so with individualists in the US. If you do not communicate your message in a more explicit way, they may not get your message. So here, the individualist works harder to get a message across. They have to say more. We cannot assume that people will understand, because they might not understand anything while you think that they do. Now, individualists are also more likely to express disagreement. This has implications, obviously, for in a conference room, in a business setting, just how much someone disagrees and how they disagree. So in this way, they are seen, individualists are seen as being confrontational. Now, I don't mean confrontation in a bad way. This is not bad. Confrontational in individualist cultures means the open expression of ideas and disagreements. This leads to resolution of problems. It improves quality and contributes to the overall success of the group. So now, in expressing disagreement or criticism, Americans are often tactful, or they use tact, meaning they do not attack a person's self-esteem. They're careful to be sensitive in dealing with others. So this has implications for how people might say that they don't like an idea. An American generally will express a disliking for an idea or something, but it's going to be done in a way that's careful, such as, I can understand why you would say it that way or think this, but would you mind if I suggested something else? It wouldn't be something like, I don't like this, and say, let me tell you what I like. That would not work very well. So the thing is, it's more, as I said, in the US culture, we more often understand that we are criticizing ideas, not people. So the disagreement and confrontation are not taken personally, unless someone is not tactful. It's a little tricky sometimes when we come to that, but that's something that needs to be spoken of in a more specific way in different circumstances. So now the thing is, with collectivist personalities, the focus or emphasis is more with keeping group harmony. So less disagreement, less criticism, not saying things, maybe saying something after a meeting. But in individualist cultures, you have to say something during the meeting. And if you say something after the meeting, the question might be, why didn't you tell us then? So disagreements are seen as breaking up group cohesion in collectivist cultures. But in individualist cultures, disagreements are seen as moving the project forward and developing greater understanding of where everyone stands in order to solve a problem. This would seem rather impolite or rude or crude to collectivists, and this would be, again, a breaking up of the harmony and cause lots of tension. On the other hand, in individualist cultures, to not bring things out in the open and not resolve things openly also to them is creating a lot of tension. So it works in the opposite way in both types of cultures. I should note also that in the United States, again, is the most individualistic culture in the world. A lot of countries are in the middle. It's largely the Northern European cultures and Western European cultures that are more individualistic, and of course, Canada, the United States, Australia, et cetera. So expressions of an I culture. These are some of the things people might think or say. In an I culture like the US, there's an expression that goes, look out for number one. Number one is you yourself. You have to look out for yourself. You can't depend on your group to do that necessarily. So you look out for yourself. You take care of yourself. There's less dependence on groups, less dependence on in-groups, less loyalty. There's loyalty to some extent, but with reason, not just because we have to be loyal. We have to have a reason for it. So, another expression that Americans use sometimes is something that is what I'll just call this for now, WIFM, W-I-F-M. People think sometimes, they don't say it out loud necessarily, they might, but they think to themselves, what's in it for me? Not what's in it for my group, but what's in it for me. So people, in other words, people act on what is in their personal or best interest. This is seen as perfectly normal. So and if you want to get something, another thing that people might think or say is that if you want to get something done, you've got to do it yourself. They don't think I'm going to go share the information with my group necessarily all the time. They might, depends on the circumstance, the context, but a thought that runs through people's minds sometimes is that if you want to get something done, you've got to do it yourself. Another expression that reveals individualism in the States is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Let me explain that, please. So a squeaking sound, I think everyone knows what a squeaking sound is. It's a noise that a door might make when there's not enough oil to make the door open smoothly, and you get a sound, it's like, or something like that. So a wheel sometimes needs grease for it to turn properly, like on a bicycle. So in other words, by saying the squeaky wheel gets the grease, we're saying that people who talk more receive attention, and this is thought to be positive attention, nothing bad. By contrast, I've heard that there's a Japanese expression that is, the nail that stands out gets hammered down. All right. Now that's obviously not good. No one wants to be hammered down. So it's Japan is much more of a collectivist culture than the United States. So while Americans are saying the squeaky wheel gets the grease, others, and maybe in Asia too, are thinking, this nail that stands out gets hammered down. No one wants to be hammered down, so you don't stand out as an individual. So another thing, individualists in the States can have both an inner and outer attitude that says, stand up for yourself. So the idea is that we are assertive. We're not passive and we're not aggressive, but assertive. So in other words, this means that if you are in, let's say, the business meeting in the conference room or talking to your colleagues, we are more likely to say what we believe than to be silent about it. This is considered to be healthy. It's a positive personality or characteristic, positive personality trait to be assertive. To be passive is to say nothing at all and just let it go. That's not good. To be aggressive is to really be rude and impolite. So being assertive is very much valued in the States. It's not that we go around thinking about it all the time, but someone that comes here to live and work should understand this idea of being assertive so they can communicate successfully at meetings. And this has very strong implications for interviewing for work here. So, so again, this is a trait of culture with high individualist cultural values. So once again, it's also in a way confrontational, but confrontational in a positive way, not confrontational in a way that is arguing with bad feelings, but just to get everything out in the open, to bring resolution to situations and move forward. So, so the thing is, we often think sometimes too, we've got to say what's on our mind. Some people will say, get it off your mind. In other words, say what's on your mind openly with less regard for how it's going to affect others. But then again, we have the American cultural trait of tact, being tactful, which means, again, being sensitive to other people's feelings when you say exactly what's on your mind. So in general, individualist style communicators feel that they should say what's on their mind. And in the context of the States, again, as I said before, this is usually tactful. Tact is a strong value in the States. So for example, something that can happen is when people hear or understand that Americans are more likely to say what they think, people from other countries might say something while they're working here that's rather direct and to the point without using the American style tact. This sort of directness without being careful about how you say it and what you say is more indicative of a Northern European culture where people are rather much more plain spoken about how they say things. So people are not always plain spoken here, but they say what they want to say. They say what they need to say, but they're careful about how they say it. This is an important thing to know if you come here to work. Now, the thing is teamwork. Let's talk about teamwork for a moment. This is one of my favorite topics. I find it really interesting, and it's a personal observation, maybe based more in opinion, but I think there's definitely something to it. So the U.S. again is a I culture. It's a culture that values teamwork, even though it's an I culture. So let me repeat that, please. The U.S. is an I culture that values teamwork at the same time. So everyone is expected to be a team player. And this is spoken openly. And if you go to a job interview, you'll have to probably tell a story about a time in which you led a team, or you were a team player, or you worked with a team. So this is a value that people are always trying to make stronger here. And why is that? Because Americans in the first place are very individualistic. So they're trying to pick up the slack in a way to make stronger their value of teamwork. So as I said, again, you may have to prove that you're a team player at an employment interview. Now, I think this is rather absurd if you're talking about Asian countries where people value their in-groups and they think in terms of we more often. To go to any Asian country and talk about how much of a team player you are, I think would not be necessary and might be really strange. But in the States, you have to talk about how much of a team player you are, because we are so wrapped up in being individualists that we don't trust ourselves to be team players at all. So this is very important. So here, next, I've got a few characteristics of individualism. People take pride and receive great satisfaction in knowing that they accomplished something or did something for themselves. And sometimes in workplaces, management will recognize this, that someone did something individually, acted on their own without the team. So for example, there is something called the Employee of the Month here. Now, I don't know if this exists in other parts of the world exactly, but it's a very rather common thing here where a company will draw attention to one person by giving them a plaque or an award or some sort of cash bonus and call them the Employee of the Month. So the company or the department finds it beneficial to draw attention to individuals who have worked notably worked to further objectives or goals of the company or department. So once again, this is drawing attention to an individual. In other cultures, people draw attention to the team. So in a way, people at companies and in departments will compete with each other as individuals, not necessarily compete against other groups. So people feel that they should speak up. So drawing attention to yourself is not necessarily a bad thing, though still this has its limitations. And with high individualism in the US, you don't want to be seen as someone who is egotistical. You don't want to be seen as someone who's arrogant or aggressive. Once again, this brings us back to being assertive. Assertive is okay, but not arrogant and aggressive. And healthy self-esteem, an expression of healthy self-esteem is okay, but not egotism. So this has its limitations. Expressing your individual self, bringing out the I in you, has its limitations in the US, even though it's a highly individualistic culture. You have to be careful how far you go sometimes. So now the thing is, there can be competition for team members to be heard at meetings. This is very important. People want to express their ideas and provide their input. They want to contribute, and they want to be known for their contributions. Now, this is so, even if they do not admit or acknowledge it. Now, some of the things, a topic that comes up in my business now and then is people ask, how do I know when I can say what I want to say at a meeting? How do I interrupt? Americans seem to keep talking endlessly without stopping, and they don't know how to get their words in. The thing is, about Americans or people maybe in more individualistic cultures, Americans have a low tolerance for silence, low comfort level when things get quiet. If there's silence for about 3, 4, 5 seconds, an American might begin to think, what's wrong? Is something wrong here? What's happening? No one's saying anything. So people tend to continuously keep talking at meetings. And so what I tell people is that, you've got to look for that 1 or 2 second silence, or look at people's facial expressions, notice whether or not someone is looking at you, maybe trying to indicate that you should say something. And then you really just have to jump in, and you have to say something like, well, can I say something here? I've got something to say, or whatever it is you say, you have to find your moment and jump in, because as I say, no one is going to give you an invitation. No one will stop and say, Yoshi, will you please tell us what's on your mind? Will you please contribute? That won't happen. Someone coming here from Japan, Asia, China, whatever country, they're going to have to learn that they have to take the floor themselves and speak, because no one is going to necessarily give them an invitation. So now a few notes about an I culture. I ask, what does this mean for how we communicate? Here's a few examples here. A data scientist from China, he told me that his manager told him that the work he was doing was really good work. His work is great, his manager told me, and he told me, the Chinese data scientist, that this seemed very unusual, and he wanted to know whether or not his manager was sincere. I was like, why is he saying this to me? And I said to him, well, I asked him, so your manager in China would never say this to you? He said, no, this never happens. And so the thing is that, once again, if an individual does really good work, then someone in charge, a manager, leader these days they call them, or director, whoever, will make it a point to tell an employee that his or her work is really very good. This is, generally speaking, what's thought to be good leadership, making people feel good to be on the team, and recognizing their work creates good feelings. But to him, his name was Mike, not a Chinese name, but I'll call him Mike. Yeah, he was just wondering what this was all about, and he thought his manager maybe was not being sincere with him. But I told him, this is normal. Just say thank you and smile and move on is the idea. So now the thing is, there's someone else in here I knew from India who told me that he is very experienced and works very hard, stays after work and works into the night, puts in lots of hours. He's got a lot of experience, knowledge, skills, and talent. And yet he noticed that people just coming out of school with less experience, only working for a couple or 3 years, were getting projects that they liked to work on, the projects that were very attractive, that they preferred to work on. And he was wondering why he couldn't get these projects and why he wasn't given promotions as the others were. And I said to him, well, the others that you're talking about, and I think he told me this too before I asked, do they talk at meetings? And he said, yes, they talk a lot. In my way of putting it, I would say, yeah, they talk their heads off. They just don't know when to shut up. So they talk a lot, they make their contributions, and they say what they want to say. Again, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. As I said to Subin, you've got to, well, if you have something to say at a meeting, you've got a contribution, you've got to say it. You've got to start talking more. And I think things are going better for him now, but that's what he started to do. And so this is something that people really ought to know, at least if not before they come here, then at least while they're working here. Fortunately for Subin, I was able to explain this to him, that keeping his head down and working and staying late and with all his experience is not going to be enough. He's going to have to start talking to get attention. And then maybe he'll get some of the projects that he really desires to work on and maybe get a promotion. So here's a note here. In an I culture, it is how you present your idea, project, plan, or product, whatever it is. It's how you present that's going to cause you to come across as credible. So they say that if you believe it, then other people will believe it. So the thing is, you cannot depend only on the quality of your information or idea that you communicate successfully. You have to put yourself into what you say. And in other words, the I must come through when you speak. So this calls to mind the idea that some cultures tend to be less emotionally expressive, less personally expressive about what they say. And they may think that the mere communication of a good idea or processes they want to implement or what they want to do is going to be enough. But unless you do what I say, for example, which is this, you place your personal attitude towards what you're saying onto the words themselves. That's a really very wide-ranging statement. And unless you do that, you might not come across as credible as you would like. And even if you come across as credible during presentations and meetings here, there's some aspect or some idea that a presentation should be, in a way, entertaining. So you can't just stand in front of people and unemotionally, inexpressively provide your information and your idea, your presentation. You have to really put yourself into it to make sure that your presentation is successful. And once again, would like to touch on this again, about an invitation to speak. No one is going to give you an invitation to say something. So people here from other countries will have to learn how to jump in the middle of a conversation during a work meeting. Some people might even interrupt and say, "Can I jump in here, please?" As if they're jumping into a hole or a pool. I'm not sure, but they really mean they're going to jump into the conversation, really enter the conversation in a way that's unexpected. But people will do this because they believe that in that moment, what they have to say is so important that it must be heard right then and there at that moment. So these things, these ideas, these things that motivate people, motivate people's communication behavior is something that, one, in the first place, people should become aware of before they come to the United States, Canada, or Australia, for example. And then while they're here, it might require some, coaching or training or practice, to begin to communicate and behave this way, because it's not natural for people to do, and it can make them feel uncomfortable. And so this is, of course, what I do in my courses and programs. But anyway, so the next thing I want to talk about is the idea of self-promotion. People promote themselves here. We have an expression here that's called sell yourself or selling yourself. Not really selling yourself, but selling your knowledge, skills, talents, knowledge, what you're able to do for a company, or something on that idea. So that's what people mean by selling yourself, self-promotion. So self-promotion is really, really not a good idea, I think, in the context of a more collectivist culture. In the United States, it's absolutely necessary, or people will not think that you're credible. They won't think that you can really do what you do unless you say what you can do. So this is, I want to touch on this for a moment. This is a quality or a characteristics of what we call a low context culture. A low context culture, to keep the explanation brief, means that people say what they must say, and nothing is left for anyone to presume or assume. No one understands anything implicitly. Most things are spoken explicitly. So if you go on an interview for work and you don't say these things that you're capable of and that you're able to do, and if you don't tell stories or promote yourself and your previous successes, people will not necessarily think that you're as credible as the next person who does communicate and behave that way. So in other words, what's on your resume or your CV is not enough. You have to actually say it and speak about it. And while you're doing that, you have to say I, not we, unless you're telling a story about a time you worked with a team. Because once again, the highly individualistic culture in the United States values teamwork. They value teamwork because it's more often something that is, let's say, a weaker quality of people in general, because whether it's conscious or subconscious, we understand we're thinking about the I. So we have to prove that we are also team players at the same time. So the thing is, so speaking of, once again, employment interviews, about employment interviews, and also when reporting or providing updates or project updates, the idea is that you tell stories about progress or accomplishments. It's not going to be implicitly understood to be self-promotion. If you talk about these things, it's going to be received well. Of course, you can't go overboard. You can't do it too much, but the idea is you talk about what you've done in a way that makes you sound like you're happy about talking about it. And again, use I when talking about progress and accomplishments in the context of both interviewing for work and updates or project updates. Now, the thing is, for example, if, for example, a middle manager is communicating with an executive team, that middle manager will want to talk about the things that he or she did, but it's also important to talk about the team's success. So in that case, people from individualistic cultures in the US will still talk about the team, because to only talk about yourself would not be a good idea if you're leading or managing a team. So in front of a group of an executive team, you'll want to talk about what your team did as well as what you did. Credit where credit is due is the expression. People want to receive credit for what they've done. That's true the world over, but it's true all around in every part of the world, obviously, but it's just that in the States, it's even truer. It's more, the feeling about this is much stronger, I think, in an individualistic culture. So, so the thing is, we have to get used to talking about ourselves. And so at an interview, at a work interview, oftentimes one of the first questions, if not the first question, is tell me about yourself. And so you have to give a review of or provide a background story of your experience, and also maybe not maybe, but also you'll want to talk about your positive traits and characteristics and qualities. And at the same time, you say I. And this can be a little bit counterintuitive for people who are from collectivist cultures, where they're going to promote themselves and talk about their positive traits and qualities. But when someone says, tell me about yourself, this is really what you have to do, as well as talk about your previous work history leading up until now, from the past up until now, or reverse chronological order is usually is what it is. Or maybe forward chronological order too, depending on how you want to answer the question. But anyway, once again, this idea of self-promotion is called selling yourself sometimes, and it's not viewed negatively. Again, if you don't sell yourself, you may not be as credible during an interview as you want to be, because you don't state openly what you've done. And this is very important. People will not presume and assume that you've done great things. You have to tell them, and it's received in a positive way. So once again, it is positive as long as you do not do it too much, and as long as you do it at the right time. Don't overdo it. Selling yourself, promoting yourself, telling about your accomplishments, talking about your positive characteristics. Even in an individualistic society like the US, this does have its limitations. You can't go on about this forever. So something to keep in mind. So yeah, so that's the other thing too, is I do tell people sometimes that this has its limitations, and we have to talk about that. How far can you go? Oh yeah, so something that I recall too, speaking of a person from a we culture being uncomfortable interviewing for work in an I culture. There was someone I knew from MIT who went to the Sloan Business School, and he was a tech person, a technology person who went to the Sloan Business School to learn about business. And eventually, I found out later, his goal was to really open up his own business and be in business for himself. And he's now in New York. But his first objective was to look for work for another company. And I think it was, I forgot which company. I think he was interviewing for Accenture. And during one of our sessions together, I listened to him. I asked him some of the interview questions, and so he could practice. And I said, wait a minute, I'm listening to you. It doesn't sound like you're involved in this. How were you involved in these things, these things that you did, and how can you make them stories? And I said to him, well, you're going to have to tell a story in the first person. You're going to say I, first person pronoun, I, you must say it. And also you have to tell your story as though you are the hero of your story, drawing attention to yourself. He told me that he couldn't do this. It made him feel very uncomfortable. He said that this would not work well in India at all. And I said, well, it's going to work here, since you're going to have to try it and do it. And so I left him with that, and we practiced, the stories and the answers to the questions. And I came back a couple of weeks later, and I said, so how did it go? And he was very pleased and smiling. He said it went really well. And he was still really in disbelief that this type of communication works well here. And this is what is expected. So I wish I had more stories like that, but specific stories. But generally speaking, this is what I coach and train people for. And I don't have a great deal of stories like this, but generally speaking, people have a difficult time talking about themselves in all the ways I just described. So the thing is, we've got a few more minutes left here. I'm going to go over a couple other characteristics of people in an I culture, particularly the United States. And really I think this is what I'm about to say is more applicable to business or working in companies in the States in general. first, there is positivity and optimism. And then there's a little bit more about confrontational behavior. Now, the thing is, when I talk about positivity and optimism, I want to be sure about something. When I talk about American optimism and positivity, I don't mean to say that Americans have a monopoly on positivity and optimism. They certainly don't. But the thing is that unless you express a great deal of positivity and optimism, you will probably be seen as a kind of pessimist or a negative person. So the mere recognition of what the reality of something can be in certain contexts can cause people to be seen as negative or maybe pessimistic. And so the thing is, if you just take a look at a very simple word, for example, problem. Americans don't like the word problem. And so what we do instead is we say opportunity or a challenge. So the word problem is frowned upon here because it's viewed as negative. So people don't have problems. They have challenges and opportunities. And the only time a problem is after it's solved. Okay, so the thing is, I want to tell you about language that people can use sometimes, which I, for the most part, suggest they not use unless they really mean it. So the thing is, I call this the language of uncertainty. It's not a good idea to use uncertain language unless you genuinely mean to express uncertainty or doubt. And I've found that when people use uncertain language here, language that doesn't express complete certainty about something, I found that when I ask them, well, do you have any reason to doubt this? And they say no, then why are you saying it this way? You really shouldn't be doing that. For example, people might use the word eventually. Eventually, we're going to need this information. Now, I know of a person who was a manager working for a pharma company here in my area in Cambridge, and he was in charge of a group of people. And I said to him, well, what do you mean by eventually? Do you mean you're going to need it by the end of the week or something like that? And he said, yeah, we really need it by Friday. I said, well, you've got to tell these people you need it by Friday because eventually it's not going to work. If he's talking to mostly Americans, and even if it's not Americans, it's still not going to work. But an American will understand eventually, literally, to mean eventually. Eventually means whenever. So I said to him, if you want it by Thursday or Friday, you have to say, we need this. We must have this report, this information by Thursday, or else you're probably not going to get it. So some other examples are things like this. I'll try. We're trying to do X. And I asked, do you know you're really going to do X no matter what? And they'll say yes. Well, don't say you're going to try. Just say we're going to get X done. If you say we'll try, I'm going to try to do X to your client or your manager or whoever it is you have to get the work done for, they might be wondering about just how certain you are about getting this done. If there's really some doubt and you have to, for some reason, try to do it, well, that's okay. Say it then. But if you have no reason to say try, you don't see anything getting in the way, then don't say try. And I've heard people do this. Another thing is, I hope. People will say, I hope something. And I ask them, why are you hoping? Do you want to make this happen? Is that what is really going to happen? And they say, yes, I'm certain of it. And they say, well, don't say hope. So this sort of thing is very important. Another thing I hear people say that I've heard is, I think so. When I ask them, do you know so? Is this your opinion or do you really know it? And they say, no, it's not my opinion. I really know it. And well, I say, then don't say think. You can assert that something is a fact if you believe and know it to be a fact. No reason to say, I think so in this case. Another thing is, I'm pretty sure. And I've asked people again, when I hear I'm pretty sure, do you know that this is true or not? And they say, yes, I know it's true. Then I suggest not saying pretty sure. You say, I'm sure, I'm certain, or just say it the way, in a way that you know, that expresses the idea that you know something to be true. Another word is probably. I'll hear people say, we're probably, I'll probably be, this will probably happen. And then I ask someone, are you certain of this? Is this really just a probability, or do you know that this is going to happen? And they say, well, yes, I know it's going to happen. This is a certainty. And I have to tell them, don't say probably, because probably will cause doubt to enter the mind of your customer, your client, your manager, your colleagues, your cross-functional team, or whatever. And they will think that maybe there's some doubt in what you say, doubt about something happening. So only say probably if you really mean probably, only if you really mean it. So this, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, the thing about probably, something comes to mind here. But the other things I hear people say are kind of, sort of, maybe, it seems like, eventually, I think, I guess, I suppose, I'm pretty sure, I should be able to, must be replaced with, I'm going to do it. Once again, unless you think that there's some room for doubt for some reason, don't say something like I should be able to. And say, I'm going to do this. Because to say I should be able to really just means you're reasonably sure. Now, if you have a real reason to only be reasonably sure, then certainly say it that way. But then at the same time, you have to say why you're only reasonably sure. You can't just make a statement that says, I'm pretty sure, or I suppose, or I guess, without backing that up with some reason that you're not entirely sure. Now, getting back to probably, and really all of these things here, another thing about communicating in the individualist culture of the United States is that we are more internally motivated, less likely to think that our environment can control what is going to happen. As I understand it, in thinking about this in a deeper way or more philosophical way, some people might think that this is rather arrogant, to think that we control what happens, we can make things happen, and what goes on in our environment counts for less. But the thing is, in a business context, if you don't communicate in a way that says that you can get something done regardless of what is going on in your environment or what else can happen to affect it, this can cause someone to seem pessimistic and lacking certainty about what's going to happen. So the idea is to communicate in a way, whatever it is you're talking about, your project, your presentation, communicate in a way that says, communicates a strong feeling, a strong thoughts for something that is going to happen, and that you're positive and certain that something is going to happen. And if there's any room for doubt or thinking that something might not happen, then you really have to explain why there's room for doubt or why you think something might not happen. And let's see, I think I'm gonna leave you with something. I'm gonna end right here with speaking of optimism and internal motivation. This sort of thing is expressed in expressions, idiomatic expressions, and I already gave one example of an idiomatic expression. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that's a reflection of American culture, saying the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Now, the thing is, there are others that express a certain type of American optimism and positivity. And I want to say again, I'm not saying that Americans have a monopoly on positivity and optimism, but they tend to carry it to a further extreme, I believe, than perhaps some other people do, even at times ignoring the reality of a situation and still wanting to remain positive in a way. So I can send these documents to you if you're interested, but one is if life gives you lemons, then you make some lemonade. In other words, you take a sour certain situation, something that's bad, and you turn it into something sweet. Americans are very fond of saying, look on the bright side. If you give bad news or say something that's negative or not right, well, there's a very strong tendency that someone will end up saying, look on the bright side, and then give an example of what is on the bright side. This is something that many people have probably heard, but we are often saying here, the glass is half full, not empty. We often say when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You make your own luck. People like to say you make your own luck. Luck is not something that is taken literally always in the States. It's something that we can create. We make our own luck. I'm not saying that other people don't think this way, but I think that Americans take it to a further extreme, an unrealistic extreme perhaps, but realistic for them, and something to keep in mind if you come to work here. A couple others are, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. If you're in darkness, eventually you'll see some light. And there's also, here's what I'll leave you with. This one expression here, that's very much a cliche, and that people put on their resumes, and when they go for work interviews, they have to prove. This is what they have to prove at a work interview, or even in their communication style at work. They have to demonstrate and prove their can-do attitude. So I'm not saying, once again, that people in other parts of the world don't have a can-do attitude. They certainly do. But Americans have to openly state it and in a way prove it for it to be taken seriously. And you can't speak with too much doubt, too much pessimism, even if it reflects reality. Americans like to hear optimism and positivity all the time, and they want to hear you express your can-do attitude at an employment interview or during your meetings and presentations at work. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I'll be glad to take questions.
Yes, students, who is moderating this, Ananya or Aheli? Get the questions from the chat box. There were, yes, anyone would like to ask questions? Are there any questions? Please type it in the chat box. Keith, yes, please type. Questions, students? Keith, whoever, anyone from the audience? Any questions? They're so spellbound by your, enchanted by your talk, they're taking a time. Yeah, there is a question. Sir, it was amazing listening to you. But we want questions.
Ma'am, there's a question
Yeah.
here in the chat box. So there are several people who have a lot of ideas but are underconfident.
Oh, ideas about questions?
How do they come up with?
I had a question. I wrote it on the chat box. So, sir, I've come across several people who have a lot of ideas, and they are always, if their ideas are put forward, they are most likely to make a lot of they are most likely to elevate themselves in their career, but then they are so underconfident when it comes to talking in front of people. They just shy away. So how do you manage that?
In my business and my work, and even the courses I teach sometimes at the Cambridge Adult Education Center, the way to manage it is with practicing, gradual adaptation, coaching, and really practicing. It's not something that people can study and learn in a book. There's no methodology for it. It's getting used to doing it, trying it out a little bit at a time. And in my business, for example, encouraging and inspiring people to talk a little louder, be a little bit more expressive in what you say. And then, of course, in the first place, make sure you say it. And then when people begin to realize that this sort of communication or behavior is rewarded and not looked down upon here, they become a little bit more confident and feel comfortable doing this. But it's really a gradual process. It's a cultural adaptation. You could say, when someone comes here, for example, from India or another Asian country, or even a European country too, because European countries, some of them are much more collectivist than the United States. It's an adaptation that people get used to, and they have to begin to become comfortable doing this, is the idea. So I hope that was satisfying. It's there's no magic wand. I can't say, wave the magic wand and say, now you are confident and you will speak up. It's a question of it's a question in my case of listening to people tell their stories at work, say what happened at work. What should I do about this? The idea is you coach people along, you give them suggestions, and you help them in that way. Now, again, an example I have, a more recent example, is that now taking the focus off Asia for a moment, there's a woman here that I worked with from Germany. Now, Germany is an individualistic culture compared to the Asian cultures, but compared to the American culture, it's a little bit more collectivist. And so the way she was telling stories or providing information for interviews is something we had to back up and reassess. And she was giving a lot of background information about her knowledge and things she did and things she knows about. And the way I coached her, the way we practiced is I said, you have to get straight to the point. What are the things you've accomplished? What have you done? You don't really want to talk about the knowledge you have and all of the details and the intricacies, and people will presume you know all this because it's on your resume and you don't have to say it or prove it. People want to know what you have done and what you personally have accomplished. And even though she is from Germany, which is individualistic compared to Asia, it's still not as individualistic compared to the United States. So even for her, Western European, I had to say, you've got to bring yourself more into this talk and not be afraid to make yourself the focus and the center of attention. So it's really a process of practicing and a little coaching, a little training, and changing your mindset. This reminds me, so maybe this will help answer, I think this will help answer your question better. Something I say to people sometimes is that to change your language, you have to change your mind. And that's what the coaching and the training and reading about this is all about. You change your mind, you change your language. Oh, it's mind blowing.
Any other question? Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. There's a question from the team. The question is, sir, you have told that sometimes we shouldn't leave the 3 to 4 second gap in between communication in America, but will always expressing what you think without a gap in thought. Will it portray us to be too upright and upfront?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat it one more time, please? I didn't get the whole thing.
Okay, sir. Sir, you told that sometimes we shouldn't leave that 3 to 4 second uncomfortable gap in
Yeah.
between the communications
Right.
while in America. But
Right.
while always expressing what you think without a gap, will it not portray us to be too upright and upfront?
Here's the thing. When I say leaving silence gaps, what I mean is that when people converse, when they're discussing things, there will be very few silences, and people will want to keep the conversation going. They might even say things that are irrelevant and just make small talk to keep things moving forward with speaking. So in that sense, that's the first thing. In that sense, when you notice that there is a place for you to enter a conversation or a discussion, you want to make sure you take that chance. And you have to really be alert and open to this. Sometimes what can happen is two people might notice that they were both about to say something at the same time. And then the other one will look at the other and say, no, it's okay, you go. So this little bit of a clash or almost a conversational crash that happens is mediated and managed by the people in the group. So no one really argues or tries to be the one speaking. Someone usually gives in. Now, that's one way of looking at it. The other thing is this, and this is something I probably didn't do during my talk, but I am not a very experienced speaker in front of large groups. So this is something I have to work on. In talks, the idea is to pause a little bit. So for example, if you make a point, if you come to the end of something, pausing for a second or two, or pausing for effect, pausing to let something sink in a little bit more is okay. People will not be uncomfortable with that as long as during your talk or presentation, it is obvious that this is a pause for effect or a pause to let people absorb what you're saying. But in general, I think the other part of the question is, is this going to make you look bad or look too out front and not really be seen in a positive light? No, really not. The idea is that people want to hear what you have to say in general, and people are not uncomfortable by somebody entering a conversation that in your mind might seem rather abrupt and rude. But in the context of communicating in the States, it's not abrupt and rude at all. It's really just wanting to get your ideas expressed, wanting to say what's on your mind. Now, the only time it can be abrupt and rude is if it's obviously abrupt and rude. Yeah, people can be abrupt and rude here. But generally speaking, to open up and try to get your ideas expressed and jump into a conversation, if you do it in the right way, it's accepted and it's not a problem. Okay, so do Americans use a lot of idiomatic phrases in day-to-day language, like maybe Greek and Latin? Yeah, idiomatic expressions and expressions, metaphorical language, figures of speech, they do tend to come up quite a bit. And the best way to approach that is to learn a little at a time and be observant, do some reading, do some listening. There are a lot of lots of media these days to take advantage of, such as movies and things online. Take notes, make notes. There are resources you can purchase. So it's really difficult to say, how do you learn? It's really difficult to answer the question, how can I learn lots of idiomatic expressions? The best answer to that is a little at a time. And here's another thing that I think that maybe people don't always do or take advantage of. Another cultural trait, another cultural aspect that this relates to is that in the I culture, or what I'll also call the low context culture, in which it's important to be explicit and say everything that's on your mind and not leave things to be presumed or assumed, or don't presume that someone's going to understand something. You have to say it. If you don't understand something that someone has said, and it's because they're using an idiomatic expression or they're speaking too quickly, I would strongly suggest, if the moment is right, if you ask them, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said. Can you please explain that? Or even, that's an idiomatic expression that I'm not familiar with. Can you tell me what you mean, please? And I don't think people do this often, but I would suggest that it would be received very well. It would not be received in a negative way. And I will relate this to another cultural aspect, which is that in the United States, in low context, individualistic cultures, the responsibility to be understood is with the speaker. So if I don't make myself understood, then it's my fault more often. And in more collectivist societies or cultures, if somebody asks a question or clarification, then it could be seen as an insult to the speaker or the person in charge, because it's more the responsibility of the person listening to understand everything. So you can feel more comfortable here asking questions about what someone said. It's better to do that than to walk away from something feeling uncertain and then not knowing what to do or think later on. So that was a little bit of a digression. I hope that helps. I forgot exactly what I was asking, but yeah.
Not at all. That was in, yes, there are more questions coming. Yes. Sure. So there are 2 or 3 questions remaining. Would you mind answering, Steve?
Yeah, not at all. I don't mind answering at all. I'm just trying to look at in the
Students
chat
are,
box.
they're so interested. And they're
Yeah.
watching in they're watching in classrooms together. That's what I hope.
Yeah,
And they're so interested, but they cannot all, write all the questions.
right. So I see two right here. What is it always necessary to put voice to your resume while in America?
You have something.
Yeah, so I have to ask, what do you mean by putting voice to the resume? I'm not sure I understand that. What does that mean? Voice to the resume?
Could you type, please? In the meantime, he will move on to the next question.
Okay.
Yes.
Because the next question is, what all pointers to keep in mind during applying in America? You mean apply? I presume that means applying for work in America. There are a number of things. First, I'll say it's really a process of learning and coaching. But if I have to give you a list, I'll say this: make eye contact, look at people, don't stare at them, but make some eye contact. Eye contact is not always made as much in other countries or cultures as it is in the United States. If you don't make eye contact, you will be seen as lacking confidence, maybe not being honest entirely, being a little insincere, but it more has to do with the confidence part. I would say you'll be seen as being less than courageous if you don't make eye contact. The other thing is this: some people are rather what I will call soft-spoken. They don't really talk loudly. I would say that it's important to assess your volume, assess how loud you speak, and notice how most Americans speak if you're here, and talk a little louder. In other words, maybe this is rather abstract, but express a little bit more forward motion, lean into what you're saying. Say something like you mean it, and don't say it in necessarily always a soft-spoken way. And the other thing, again, is just to be sure that you are not afraid to use I. Tell stories, use I. Don't be afraid to make yourself the center of attention. So something else I'm reminded of right now. If you're talking about both a resume and the type and the way you answer questions at an employment interview. And I can send this later if you remind me, but what to keep in mind is this. This is the information you want to give people at an interview or on a resume. How did you want to answer these questions? Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them, depending on the question you answer and your place and your position and what you do. You want to keep in mind that what's important is how you saved money, saved time, solved problems, generated revenue, improved quality. These are the things you want to address when you answer questions at an interview. So if someone says to you at an interview, for example, and this is somewhat of a still common question, why should I hire you? I have lots of applicants here. Why should I hire you? This directs our attention towards the individual again. In other words, people want to know about you, the individual, not necessarily what's on your resume. Why should I hire you? People ask. So the thing is, to answer that question, you could answer that question with a story. And a story could be something about how you saved money, saved time, solved problems, generated revenue, or improved quality. So here's something I would just definitely keep in mind in applying for work here. Just about any question you answer can be answered with a story. And the other thing is this: you want to think about your accomplishments and successes of the past and become familiar with having a conversation with yourself about these accomplishments and successes. Because essentially what goes on in an interview is it's really an extended conversation in which you do all the talking about yourself. And the thing is, you want to answer questions quite directly. If someone asks you a yes/no question, you must begin with yes or no, or I don't know. If someone asks you an information question, begin with providing that piece of information directly, and then go on to talk a little bit more. So these are the things I would keep in mind, and it's really a learning process because it's really a behavioral communication change that people make, and they really prepare themselves for. Okay, some other
So
questions.
many questions, I think, of which to choose. Yes, there is something which would be, yes, Keith, do you have something to ask?
I see some
Steve.
other here.
Yes.
Pointers. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, pointers. So, sir, while we are addressing a crowd, maybe a
Afterwards.
small audience, we intend to feel blank while speaking, might fumble as well. So how can we avoid and just keep moving ahead? Well, the thing is, if you make a mistake or you fumble during a talk, the best thing to do is ignore it. Keep going. I would look at it this way, conceptually. In a band, in a musical situation, if the singer, for example, forgets some words or makes a mistake or does something wrong, what the singer has to keep in mind is that the drummer is not going to stop. The beat keeps going no matter what. The band is not going to back up, slow down and say, okay, get those words you missed. Everything keeps going. So that's how I would look at your presentation. If you feel like you're fumbling, the idea is to keep going. And the other thing to think about is this, don't try to be perfect. Everybody's human. You're going to make mistakes, and your audience will appreciate you more and like you more if you demonstrate that you have these human qualities of imperfection, flaws, making a mistake. It's okay. And I'll be honest with you too, this is something I'm working to develop better on my own, which is why I'm glad that feel pleased to be invited here, because it gives me my first forced opportunity to do it, because I probably wouldn't have taken it upon myself to find a situation like this. So thank you, Vinaya, for forcing me to do this. I appreciate it. But the thing is, so and then beyond that and after that, after what I just said, it's really just a question of practicing. The idea is to practice, and don't be afraid of making a mistake. Keep going. Be human. Be a person. No one's going to judge you for tripping over your words. Just back up and say something like, "Oh, excuse me. Here's what I really mean to say." Something on that idea. That's how I would handle it.
Oh, there are so many questions. Keith has something to ask. You hear? Okay. So many compliments, which Ananya was going to read out. So many compliments. Could you read out a few? Keith, what's your question?
I just wanted to ask Steve whether he liked people to use visual aids.
Yeah, so I have a few feelings about that. First thing that comes to mind is I have some people will say, I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation. I said, you're doing what? You mean you're going to teach you're going to teach people how to use PowerPoint? Said, no. I'm getting my PowerPoint. I'm getting my PowerPoint slides ready. Well, there's a problem in my mind with the focus there. People think they are presenting slides. They think they're presenting slides before they are presenting their information in their own way or whatever they're talking about. And the next thing that comes to mind is people will say during a presentation, next slide, please, next slide. And I don't like that because it makes it sound like you're flipping pages of a textbook, and really people are there to hear you, not look at the slides. And it's much better. I tell people to say something like, the next thing I'd like to talk about, the next thing on the agenda. And that should be a signal to somebody that's using the projector or something like that to go to the next slide. Or a lot of times presenters, they go to their next slide, and you shouldn't be saying go to the next slide. It makes it sound like you're something less than human. Like, what are you, a group of slides? And the next thing is this. I remember a few years back, and this gets to the heart of your question. I remember a few years back, I was working with someone with pronunciation, which people call accent reduction here sometimes, but it's really pronunciation to make sure that people are clearly understood when they speak faster. And so this woman was doing a presentation she wanted me to hear. and she wanted me to hear the presentation. So I'm listening, and I'm looking at her slides at the same time, and her slides are filled with words, and she's reading the words from the slide. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" You said, "Well, this is how I present." And I said, "This is not going to be received very well. People want to hear you present the information. They don't want to be read a textbook." So in my feeling, what should be on slides are a few of the major points, the takeaways that a presenter wants to provide, a few main points, what they call bullet points, or 1, 2, 3. During this part of the talk, these are the main takeaways. This is what I want you to know. And then the other thing I think that should be on slides will be maybe some pictures or photographs that illustrate clearly, maybe in a metaphorical way, or a kind of storytelling way, what the person is presenting and talking about. So I think that PowerPoints and slides and things like this are good, as long as they are used on the periphery, off to the side, and not made the center of attention in somebody's mind, and as long as the people in the audience are looking at the person speaking and not looking at the slides. From my very personal point of view, as I progress more in my own kind of public speaking, I do not want to cause myself to be dependent on slides. And I'll admit something. I don't use PowerPoint. I don't know how to use PowerPoint. I'd rather become familiar with the outline of what I'm going to say, the outline, and remember to go to each point on the outline.
I wasn't just referring to slides. I was thinking about flip charts, whiteboard.
Yeah.
Aids like that, they're often much better than PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah, definitely. I feel very strongly that whiteboards and flip charts, these are all very good. And I would just say the same thing about those things as I would about slides. Just don't depend on it too much. In my circumstances, which I will call public speaking, in the courses that I do, for example, at a place called Cambridge Center for Adult Education, I do use a whiteboard. I don't have flip charts, but I use a whiteboard, and I have handouts. I hand out papers, and but let's just say, for example, I'm talking about intonation in front of a group. I'll write some things that have to do with intonation on the board, some examples, how to practice, some key words. I'll write those key words on the board and write some examples, but I'm not spending a great deal of time writing many things on the board. Eventually I turn around and I say, okay, I'm going to talk to you directly about how you can improve your intelligibility when you speak at work, so that you're sure people always understand you. And if people always understand you, then you will become more effective if you can use the English system of intonation when we speak. So yeah, I use whiteboards. I don't use flip charts, but I use whiteboards, but I like to make sure that I'm prepared to speak directly to the class without having to turn around and use the board or depend on my papers all the time. In fact, a lot of times what I do is I hand out papers and I say, okay, your homework is to go home and read all this information I've written about intonation and speaking clear speech in English. Go home and read all that. I'm going to talk to you now. And by the way, anything that's on those papers, you're going to hear me say here. And so that's how I personally approach it. I really believe that people are presenting themselves, and we shouldn't be too dependent on the tools. The tools are good. I'm nothing against them, as long as the individual is presenting herself or himself to the audience. And that's how I view it. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there are a lot of questions. Thank you for this. I don't know. I have no words to describe. Mind blowing, as I said, enchanting, and people were just spellbound listening, and we could go on listening, more and more to you, Steve. But you see the time, and those who have more questions can ask him. He will leave his address, and you could communicate with him. You would leave his email ID on the chat. We will share it with all of you. So over to Ananya. Could you read some of the compliments, Steve? Have you read Ananya, or have you read it, Ananya? Okay.
If
Yes.
anyone, I'd be
Yeah.
glad to take
So,
more questions if anyone wants to ask any more questions.
Thank you once again. Okay, Ananya, read the questions. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr.
Am I
Vinaya,
audible?
I have to go for the panel. Yes.
Dr. Vinaya,
Yeah, I'll leave. Yes.
I think we should conclude this by thanking Steve that it was really a spellbound, presentation of your, the culture of America was actually required, because most of our students of engineering, domain apply for their international universities towards US only. And so I have asked a question which is not yet answered, but I will be asking you through my email,
Okay.
because the panelists are waiting, and I have few questions related to US culture when students are, shifting, transferring from their Indian culture, university culture to US universities culture. So they just face few issues that they write to me, and I may get some good answers from your side, that I will be able to help those students or alumni. Even our 6th, 7th, 8th semester students also opt for some semester exchange programs, etc. So we really need to guide them that culture. And so I writing, because though I have written one question, but because students have asked so many questions that you were answering them, and I will be writing few questions on your mail, and would be requesting you to help me with that.
Sure.
And because all 7 panelists are waiting, our panel discussion already 8:30 was planned. We are behind schedule for them. We should be.
If it's okay, I will record my answers for you and send them.
That will be great. That will be great. In fact, I would request you, if you have any other recorded links that I could share with my students, it will really be good. And in case you have taken any kind of, during last 2 years, it was all online. And if you have some recorded lectures of your lecture delivered to your students, that will be really of great help to me also, and my students also.
Well, I don't have any recordings, but I would be glad to answer as many questions as you have to get myself into the business of recording.
Fine, thank you so much, Steve. Because I think if this presentation was such that we were not ending it and were asking the questions, though we are getting the messages that panelists have joined that, and my students are not even shifting. So what I would be requesting you, Steve, because this is my second, I'm listening to you for the second time last month around, around end of May we met, and there also I was totally, it was again, I will say the spellbound word is actually less, because I was impressed that time also. You remember that I was in a very hectic situation. Still, I told you that I got all energy, out of that conversation.
Right.
So I might be requesting you. We have our orientation program. In India, we name it as Diksha Aram. There's an orientation program for fresher students. So 10,000 around students join MIT University for their different programs, UG programs and PG programs. And there we invite some guest lectures, nationally and internationally, based on the domain. So for this particular workshop, I may request you, I may bother you once again, and send you the invitation to join us then. And schedule is already there. The block calendar is already there. I will share with you, Steve, just to know that you will be free in that duration or not. The time slot, the dates that are freezed, I would be requesting you to respond me for that. And accordingly, I will be planning that next lecture.
Whether I can do that or not just depends on what else is on my calendar, but I'd be glad to do it.
Exactly. That's the reason I said that I will be sharing the calendar, the block calendar with you, so that we can fix up any date if possible.
Okay, yeah. So generally speaking, as far as what's available is, it's easy to say what's not available. Generally speaking, what's least available are my evenings, Eastern time here in the US. So, but during the day, it's spotty. It depends on what I have scheduled. And Saturdays are iffy. It depends on, but yeah. So so my daytime, Eastern time, US daytime are times that I'll have available. It just depends on the specific hour of the day, but evenings, generally speaking, not if we're talking Eastern Standard Time, that is. So that means not the morning your time. So like.
Got it. Yeah. So we will schedule it accordingly. Let's see that. How can we go about it? Thank you so much, Steve. I think Dr. Vinaya has left for the panel discussion. And
Okay.
so thanks a lot once again. And we have the valedictory program tomorrow from 3:30. And I will be sending you the invite for that too, along with the link to join the valedictory program. Thank you.
You're talking about me, sending me a link to
Yeah,
something?
Steve, I'm sharing the invite with you that
Okay.
we are sharing the invite with the panelists,
Okay.
all our guests, so that this is tomorrow will be the culmination of this third edition of the Literature Festival. And so I'm inviting you for the valedictory program. The winners will be declared. The competition, there were 8 competitions, and the winner names will be announced tomorrow.
Okay. So tomorrow afternoon, I'll keep that in mind. Okay.
Thank you so very much. Thanks a lot.
Welcome. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.